Marco D'Amico and Shaun Starr with you. Thanks you so much for subscribing to our channel. The journey to 20,000 begins with one sub at a time, and you guys are definitely a strong part of that journey. And thank you so much for being a part of it. I know I can speak for Marco on that. And of course, you can support us by supporting our sponsors at Little Bear, littlebearonline.com. Proudly family owned and operated a small business in Montreal, on St. Catherine, in Westmount, across from Alexis Neon Plaza, curbside pickup and delivery in your area, and specials that change all the time. I encourage you to go check out their website at littlebearonline.com. They care about your family's pet as much as you do. Marco, good to see you again. And listen, I just want to bring up another topic, because here we are closer to the start of the Montreal Canadiens regular season with the reigning Rookie of the Year in the National Hockey League. Still Sans contract extension, long-term security. Juraj Slafkovsky was able to get his kind of max deal. He's into the first year of that. And you and I have talked about this before, but our friend and colleague, Nicolas Cloutier, brought this up in the Journal de Montréal. And I want you to expand and break it down for us here, that who's going to be the market setter as it relates to who gets paid, who can we look at, Luke Hughes and the New Jersey Devils, and the correlation between Montreal Canadiens' own number 48, Lane Hutson. So let's start with the market setter. Is there a chance Kent Hughes and management in Montreal is looking at this Devils dossier, waiting for that to be settled, and then they'll tackle Lane Hutson?
Yeah, I don't want to make it seem like one side is waiting on the other. I think both sides are waiting to see what happens with Luke Hughes. Just so fans kind of understand this, there's a paradigm shift going on in the NHL right now.
Okay.
So basically, we saw years prior guys getting to the moment they were eligible for, an extension even prior to the conclusion of their contract. They'd be signing 8 years out of their ELC, like almost like clockwork, right? And that was the case when the cap was flat or flat-ish, going up by $1 million a year those last couple of years. But this is no longer the case. The cap is going up by 9% a year. Your idea of what is fair from a salary perspective is no longer relevant, because all of that is set to go up, but no one wants to make the first move. And I'm not talking about signing a guy with less than 60 games of experience, like a Frank Nazar, for example, who I think is going to be excellent, but had absolutely no leverage whatsoever in his situation and took that security. We're talking about the cream of the crop signing long-term deals. And we haven't seen that yet for guys coming out of their entry-level contracts. We've seen guys, for example, you look at Keandre Miller in Carolina signing a long-term deal. He had arbitration rights. You look at Noah Dobson signing a long-term deal, RFA with arbitration rights. But the grand majority, 6 of the 8 years that there's, or in Dobson's case, actually 7 of the 8 years that he signed for are unrestricted free agent years. For example, if Lane Hutson were to sign right now for next season, it would be an 8-year deal, for example. 5 of those 8 years are going to be RFA years. Those are worth less on average. And so you just got to factor that in. So all this business talk, winded stuff, get to the granular stuff. Like, what's the point? Get to the point, right? Yeah. This is the point that needs to be made. No agent wants to make a move right now. They don't want to be the trendsetter. They don't want to be the team that messes up the market. And we've seen this before, right? General managers across the league all face-palmed themselves, and I think a couple of Habs fans too, when Carey Price signed that $10.5 million contract, because that changed the game for goaltenders being paid. Because I think at the time Henrik Lundqvist was the highest paid, and Price beat him by $2 million. So at earning 25% more, that's a big jump. So if you're a guy like Lane Hutson, you see this jump in salary year after year after year. So you're going from $95 million this year to a minimum of $103 million next year, $104 million next year. And then the projection after that is $113 to $114 million. So it's going up by 9% year over year for 3 years at minimum. And then we're going to get into the later stages 2 to 3 years from now. Expansion may be on the table, and that will continue to rise. So what does that mean? It means throughout the life of this contract, an 8-year deal that is signed today, for example, effective next year, the salary cap may almost double. And so if you're like a Lane Hutson asking for about 9% of the salary cap,
Totally.
that 9% today could be worth 5% in the last 2 years of the deal. And that is where agents are a little iffy and afraid to go long term unless somebody else does and sets that market. That's why all eyes are on Luke Hughes and Mason McTavish.
I like the 9% number because it slots in nicely. Brock Faber, 8.9. Jake Sanderson, the Ottawa Senators, 9.15. And so if we work off the math of $104 million in terms of the salary cap, when hypothetically Lane Hutson's contract would kick in the 2026-2027 season, that puts Lane Hutson in the low nines to mid nines in terms of a salary range for Lane Hutson, which I'll put my hand up right now and I'll spit my opinion out. I would have no problem if the Montreal Canadiens locked Lane Hutson into like a 9.275, a $9.3 million per year salary. What I'm interested in, and look, I don't have any internal insight in the dynamic of the Montreal Canadiens dressing room, but Noah Dobson makes a lot of money. And I don't know how much the Canadiens think about, how much Dobson makes, how much Suzuki makes, the team infrastructure. I don't get the impression, not even for a second, that Lane Hutson is all about the almighty dollar and is going to pull a Luke Hughes and not show up to training camps kind of situation. Like, he's out there publicly saying, let Shaun Coffey, let my agent handle this. I'm here to play hockey. Like, I buy that attitude. But what do you think, your educated guess on hypothetically that Hutson lands in that low nines to mid nines salary range per year?
I think the best way that I can put this is when you look at what would be fair for Lane Hutson, you have guys, some of our colleagues across English and French media calling for double digit 10, 12, 11. I saw the other day, 12, and I mean million per year over an 8-year deal. I don't think that's going to happen. Okay. I could confirm that the Canadiens have given one offer to Lane Hutson, and it was nowhere near that amount. So we're not even going there. Now, do I believe that the Canadiens would pounce to sign an 8 times $8.5 million deal with Lane Hutson? Yes.
Yes,
I think that they'd love to sign something like that. But the reality is that someone in Lane Hutson's situation, if they were only about the money, would be pushing 10. Now we know that Lane Hutson cares more about staying in Montreal than breaking bank. So now the negotiation ensues, and that negotiation will be in large part narrated and directed by what other teams are going to do to set the market. The Canadiens, if you're in Kent Hughes' spot, there is absolutely zero rush to give in to any salary requests in this situation because you're not setting the market. You're waiting for other people to set the market. And so Tom Fitzgerald in New Jersey, Pat Verbeek right now in Anaheim, they're setting it. They're setting that market. Yeah. They're the ones with the pressure right now while the rest of the league watches. And it's not, I think Elliot Friedman touched on this. It's not like a collusion amongst the league. Same thing's happening with unrestricted free agents to be. Look at Kirill Kaprizov. He's waiting to see what McDavid signs for 2 reasons. A, because his owner said he was ready to make him the highest paid player in the league. And it's always best for the best player in the league to sign his contract before that happens, because then you could use his words against him in a negotiation. But also, when you look at the idea of measuring yourself up to other teams and other players, it's always a little different. So you look at like for example, Jack Eichel is probably going to set that market for the elite second tier, right? Like we have like 5 or 6 guys really at like the top of the elite, and then you really have that second tier, and I think that's Jack Eichel is at the top of that list. Mm-hmm. Well, he's probably going to sign in the 13 to 14 million in Vegas, which means it's probably closer to, in terms of like direct worth, probably closer to 15, 16 million if you were to go into a heavier tax province or state. So that's going to set the market. That's going to start conversation. That's going to give someone like Connor McDavid a benchmark, right? And so everyone's kind of waiting for that benchmark. The forward groups, I could tell you this from sources, are not happy with Pat Verbeek right now because Pat Verbeek is trying to strong arm McTavish, and that could potentially ruin the upward market for forwards. I'm talking about guys being represented, guys that are representing, players like Logan Cooley. You look at CAA right now with a guy like Adam Fantilli, who is not talking contract because he doesn't want to get into this. He wants to play his full season, and hopefully, if his trajectory continues to go, he might be closer to a point per game.
Sure.
You can go and get that $10 million over an 8-year deal. That's what's happening right now. So for all the fans that are kind of, because again, like, I know I'm going to get in the comments, no one's asking about this. I get dozens of DMs asking me why Lane Hutson is not signed on a regular basis, ladies and gentlemen, constantly. Heck, my mother will text me to be like, why is Lane Hutson not signed? So like, I'm just saying, it is a valid question because times are different, and that's fair. But from what I'm being told, Luke Hughes is set to sign a longer term deal. We're talking between 6 to 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the Montreal Canadiens have one thing in their mind beyond, because they absolutely want an 8-year deal. Lane Hutson, if he had it his way, would very much like an 8-year deal, just about finding the middle. But they absolutely want this done before they even get close to the snow melting, because you absolutely cannot go into next summer with an unsigned Lane Hutson and an extendable, because his contract will allow him to extend his contract next summer, an extendable Ivan Demidov. You cannot go to July 1st next year. You can't. So the Canadiens have some time, some leverage to push back and say, we're not going to go above a certain number. And, that number is, not necessarily what the Hutson camp is looking for. But I'll tell you this, they're in conversation every day. They're exchanging information, waiting to see how the market fluctuates. Like, if, and I say this, from based on my understanding, if Luke Hughes signs in the next 3 or 4 days, like we expect him to, then I believe the conversations for a Lane Hutson extension pick up and the temperature rises a little bit. Because now you have a benchmark to be like, well, look at what that guy got. For example, and I will give you this direct example. One of the sticklers in Tom Fitzgerald's negotiation right now with Luke Hughes, from what I'm being reported, or from what I'm being told and now reporting, is it's going to be long-term. They tried to go with the 5-year threat so that he and Jack Hughes could finish their contracts at the same time and leave. That was obviously meant to, try and get a little bit more on the negotiation scale on the tail end, because if you want 8 years of Luke Hughes, well, unless, if they manage to find some way to get Quinn Hughes in between that time, he's probably going to be their number one defenseman, right? So you got to pay that man. And so the problem has always been, it's a long-term deal. You would rather not pay him more than his brother. But the reality is, if Brock Faber and Jake Sanderson are making $8 million or more over 8 years in a flat cap situation, Luke Hughes probably deserves an 8 in his in his salary, or to start his salary on an 8-year deal as well. Right. So that's kind of the stickler.
Let me jump in here for a second, because I'm confused. Okay. Like, if we're talking on one side of our mouth that we believe that Lane Hutson isn't held hostage by the almighty dollar, wants to stay in Montreal 8 years max, whatever, in terms of the contract.
Yeah. Would love for it to be as long as possible.
Fine. Then my confusion is, well, why isn't it done yet? Okay, let's say they're waiting for Luke Hughes and that to be settled. So let's admit Luke Hughes will be the market setter as it relates to Lane Hutson's future contract, right? But like, in my head, where the confusion really rains down on me is Lane Hutson is coming off a historic season with his 60 assists and 66 points. Like, what if he runs it back? What if a 66-point season goes into a 70-point season? Like, I can envision a world where it's going to cost the Canadiens another $2 million or $16 million over the life of an 8-year deal. So, like, if he's not held by the dollar, why isn't a deal done?
I don't think he's held by the dollar, but I think it's being fair. I think, without divulging too much, I think everyone kind of knows how shrewd of a negotiator Kent Hughes is.
For sure.
Okay. So you like the best way I can put this is as such. Kent Hughes signed Caden Gooley to a 6-year, $5.5 million contract.
Yeah, what a sweetheart deal. That's my new Max Pacioretty deal. I keep saying that's my new Pacioretty deal. It's a great deal.
That's it, right? Yeah. Most of the contracts that Kent Hughes has signed since becoming a general manager are considered steals today. The only one he didn't sign was Nick Suzuki's, which
Yes.
Credit to Marc Bergevin on that one. Steal of a deal right now. Steal of a trade, steal of a deal. Best legacy he could have left that team.
Maybe Bergevin's best trade? Maybe his best trade?
I would wager that getting the team's first actual number one center in 30 years is a good trade. Yes. No offense to obviously I love Saku
tell it like it is, brother. Tell it like it is.
I mean like bona fide point per game set. Like,
yes, correct.
It's just a different level. And so and it's not even on those players like Thomas Plekanec, David Desharnais. It's Saku Koivu. I just include him there because they put him on the first line.
Agreed.
It's no disrespect to them. They deserve the minutes they got because there was no one better and they excelled in those positions. But here you have a bona fide number one center. So back to the topic at hand. When you are understanding the way that negotiations happen early, right? The Canadiens, they don't want to make a mistake here. And not saying that Lane Hutson's not worth the money, but you got to position yourself long-term, right? And you want all these contracts to be kind of under control and under a certain understanding. Yes, obviously Lane Hutson deserves more of the pie than Nick Suzuki did at the time because, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. He's had a better rookie season and he's got more under his belt than Nick Suzuki did at the time of his drafting. At the time of his signing. So there's a difference in that regard. What I will say is this. From what I understand, the separation in terms of dollars is not strong enough for anybody to worry. They're not $1 million apart on an 8-year deal, in my honest opinion. When you look at, so if it's less than that and he's an RFA, I really wouldn't worry. But Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon are such shrewd, nonsensical negotiators that you have to understand that this is a negotiation and they are trying to, temper expectations. And that isn't to say that Lane Hutson came in with a big ask. I sincerely doubt that. In fact, people in the know think that whatever Lane Hutson signs for, unanimously, the NHL is going to be like steal. So I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about any of this at all. It's something that we bring up simply just to keep updates on. But what I will say is the second that Luke Hughes signs, the wheels on the bus will start to turn. And I think that's where we're at right now.
In season? Like you said earlier, like what hypothetically,
could be before the season.
Is this video's out on Friday? And what if Luke Hughes gets a contract in the first 7 days of October, right before the Devils season gets going?
I think it'll happen before then.
Okay, so it's the September 25th. This video's out on September 26th. So give or take a day. I'm just asking if Lane Hutson's contract after Luke Hughes gets his, they're going to do this in season.
Let's just say both parties would prefer if it were done prior to.
Okay,
and are just waiting to see what will happen.
Perfect.
And again, this is what everybody wants. This means it's going to happen.
Yeah,
but I'm saying there is if Luke Hughes signs in the next 3 to 4 days, there is enough time and they've done enough talking where they can get a little closer on AAV if the term is 8. Now, if Luke Hughes signs for 6 years,
oh boy,
then that may change the conversation. Maybe they push for 6 years and reevaluate. Maybe the AAV is a little lower in consequence from potentially in the 9s. It's all about that conversation. But this is also when the player comes into the equation and the player's wants and the player's needs. And we saw it last year with Jake Evans. Jake Evans' representation was asking for $4 million over 4 years. He ended up signing for I believe just under 3, right? 2.9.
Yeah, 2.8. Yeah.
2.8. There you go. So 2.8 over 4 years. So that's a significant drop because the player stepped in and said, I don't care.
Wow.
So I'm not saying Lane is going to do this.
His condo was packed, bro.
I know, I remember. But I'm not saying that this is going to happen. I'm not saying that that Lane Hutson is asking for too much in my estimation. But I think there's a shrewd negotiation happening. And as a fan of the team, I speak to you on this. Let Kent Hughes do his job and, let Lane Hutson's representation do theirs. But I can tell you that there's enough good faith between both parties that absolutely no one has to worry about it.
I think I could speak for the Habs fan base, and my own opinion is Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon have more than done enough to allow me to trust the process. That cliche "trust the process" line. They've done their work. Their credibility to me is right there, and I can't wait for you and I to do a reaction video to a Lane Hutson contract. Talk about the term, talk about the dollars, and talk about this team finding another level as the season gets going. Marco D'Amico with RG Media, rg.org. You can follow him at MN D'Amico, and you can support us by supporting our sponsors at Little Bear. And don't forget, Marco D'Amico, part of TSN 690's Habs Breakfast every Wednesday at 8:05. And don't forget, like and subscribe to our video. Our journey to 20,000 subs begins with you. Thanks again, Marco, and looking forward to more reaction video as the Canadiens near their regular season opener.
Have a good one, everybody.